whenever you're near.
The Beach Boys doing a little woodshedding, a short demo recording of I Can Hear Music. You know, 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the group's 2020 album, I Can Hear Music being probably the best-known song from that collection. Well, for some, this album is considered a hodgepodge of disparate recordings overseen by various members of the group without the guiding hand of their leader, Brian Wilson. The use of two Smile-era songs, Our Prayer and Cabanescence, to bolster the number of songs Brian was involved in is seen as maybe a troubling sign. But what if you had just bought the 2020 album without knowing any of the details, without knowing any of the Smile songs or who was behind what? Well, that's how I discovered this album, free of any of the baggage that may surround it. So to me, it was an incredible, tuneful, and artful set of songs. And next to Pet Sounds, it's my number 2 favorite Beach Boys album. Joining us to discuss this album, track by track, as we always do on these occasions, is editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, David Beard. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I always enjoy being on and talking about our favorite American group.
Absolutely. And like I said in the opening, I was at a flea market as a kid, and I really wasn't a big Beach Boys fan. I only knew the singles and Endless Summer, so I picked up this album not knowing anything about it, listened to it, and just fell in love with it. What was your story with 2020?
I discovered this album in an unusual way. Similarly, the same way that I discovered Smiley Smile, Wild Honey, and Friends. I ended up getting the Warner Brothers, I think they were released in 74.
Yes.
The twofers. They were just in those beige jackets.
Yeah.
And all the packaging had was a girl, like a silhouette of a girl in front of a palm tree or a car. And there was just no original artwork to be found. So I listened to 4 LPs, and each one of them had kind of a Smile element to them, because obviously Smiley Smile had songs that were left over and or re-recorded that were to have appeared on Smile. Wild Honey had Mama Says, which was a part of the Smile concept. And then with Friends, the song Diamond Head, although I don't think that was not intended for Smile in any way, shape, or form, it still had that kind of ambiance to it, that weird ambiance.
Yes.
And then 2020, I would find out, and I don't remember when I found out these songs were related to one another, but then, of course, 2020 ends with Our Prayer and Cabanescence, and I remember very distinctly listening to these Warner Brothers sets, and when 2020 came to an end, I think it's probably the reason why Cabanescence is my favorite song by the Beach Boys. Because 2020, as we get into this track-by-track discussion, at times, it's so comforting, musically speaking.
Yes.
At other times, it's, I think jarring is the wrong word. I just think that because each person brought their own kind of flavor and music to the collection, this is a hodgepodge to some degree, but I didn't know that. And I think for that reason, it's not my second favorite album by the group, unlike you, but it's somewhere up there in a list of albums that I do enjoy by the band. But I think it just goes back to the fact I had those 4 albums in that strange packaging.
And like we always do, we'll talk about all the tracks on the album. We won't play them all because there's just no time to do that, but let's begin at the very beginning with track 1, Do It Again. We talked about this song at length, so we don't have to play it, but it seems a little odd being on this album because, first of all, the cut's in mono, the rest of the album is in stereo, but again, listening to it for the first time, it never occurred to me that Do It Again was an older song or that it really wasn't part of this series of recordings.
Yeah, I look at the 2020 choice in terms of leading off the album is the fact that was their latest single. I mean, they did approach things that way, whether it was with Capitol assistance or if it was truly a Beach Boys vision. And I think most of the time it was Capitol, Records people at play.
Right.
I would think everyone's thought process was, yes, it makes sense to put Do It Again as the opening track. It sounds like an opening track. Yeah. I mean, it's actually perfect to open an album of any kind. It would have been interesting on the Friends album. We talked about that before. but I don't know where you would have placed it because it's a lead track.
Yeah.
I mean, it kicks off just the way it starts with the drum beat and everything. It's very unique, and it's almost born to be a lead track.
And as the mono version of Do It Again fades away, we hear the woodshop sound effects recorded during the Smile era. That's in stereo. That brings us into the stereo widescreen remainder of the album. And track 2, I Can Hear Music, it's one of the best Beach Boys covers. In fact, it may be the best Beach Boys cover. And this is really Carl's big chance, to coin a phrase. This is his moment. I mean, he's singing lead, he's producing, and the track is incredible.
It's a very strong recording. And I absolutely believe two things happened on this recording. One, because it's a Phil Spector song.
Right.
That this was an effort because it was recorded at Brian's house in Bel Air. This was an effort to get Brian out of the bedroom. Literally.
Right.
They recorded a little bit at Wally Heider's. They recorded a handful of stuff at the Valentine studio. And then the rest of it was done in Brian's house. And I absolutely, based on my discussions, my recent interviews with Mike Love, Al Jardine, and Bruce Johnston, that was one of those things that was intentional. Because if Brian will come down and participate, then you've got the icing on the cake, right? But when Brian didn't get involved, because he's not involved in any way, shape, or form, this really gave Carl the opportunity to shine. I mean, and he does. This is, I think, the first non-Brian Wilson-produced Beach Boy single.
And I just want to mention, I think the Doobie Brothers borrowed the a cappella breakdown in this song for their own song, Black Water.
well, hold on a minute. Do you know?
Here we go.
Do you know what's being sung in that spot of the song? A lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know this until probably about 10 years ago, because I was at I went to an Al Jardine show, and it was sound check, and they were rehearsing the song, and Billy Hinchy was doing the bass for that break. But do you know what Mike Love is singing at that point in the song?
No, what is he singing?
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
I had no idea.
Now when you know that and you listen to it, that's what's going on back there. I think Brian and everybody was surprised at how well Carl developed. That's not a slight to Carl. I'm just saying that Carl, because he was young, he was so young when they started, that he really paid attention, and he really, I think, if you look at his career, it's as though he really made it a point to be better all the time. And they never knew how long they were going to be doing it.
Right.
But you could see all along the album, from one album to the next, to the next, to the next, going all the way back to Surfin' Safari, Carl is learning and paying attention. And I think that's why Carl was probably the first of the group. I think it's historically been said that when it came to Pet Sounds, Carl was the first one to kind of pick up on what was going on and started telling the other guys, you should pay attention because this is special. Because, Carl studied music. He learned from John Moss. And so by the time you get to 2020, I think Brian felt comfortable, and that's why he would listen. He'd listen to the songs and decide whether or not he was going to come down. And if he didn't think there was a reason to come down, he wouldn't come down because he was more than happy, more than content with what the guys were recording and pulling off. And if you go back to that 1985 Malcolm Leo, an American Band movie, there's footage of them working on the 2020 album doing Time to Get Alone.
Yes.
And that's one of those sessions, and if you go back and watch that, I think they even included some of that in the Endless Harmony documentary. So if you go back and look at that footage, you get a real sense of kind of the,
the camaraderie that the group had,
there. But it was a very, very much a democratic process. Everyone was kind of left to their own devices, and then Steve Desper and Carl kind of became the organizer, and Steve Desper's kind of the hidden gem in all this. He's engineering this stuff. He probably had to do more than we understand.
Well, let's talk a little bit about exactly what Brian was doing during this time. I mean, they're recording in the house, Brian's in his bedroom above the studio, but he can hear what they're doing. And we've seen this over time. I mean, we've gotten to this point where, look, Brian was singing lead primarily on Pet Sounds, and he would have handled most of the leads on Smile. By the time we get to Smiley Smile and Wild Honey, he's giving Carl more of the leads. And then with Friends, you've got Dennis contributing more to the songwriting. And now with 2020, it's, sort of an all-comers policy. Everybody's contributing. But Brian really wasn't busy doing nothing. He was doing other things.
Yeah, it's a fairly prolific time now. It's great because it gave the individual members an opportunity to feel out the writing process, opening doors in a way that gave them kind of an avenue of creativity that otherwise wouldn't have been there had Brian still been running the show. Brian was not, and this is an interesting thing about this period. They were done doing the sessions for the 2020 album by November, and then Brian is soon in the studio with the Honeys recording Goodnight My Love and Tonight You Belong to Me. So it's not as though Brian was not interested in recording. It's my opinion that Brian felt pressure to produce a hit record for the Beach Boys. And with the Honeys, there wasn't that type of pressure.
Right.
So I think he just tended in general to enjoy himself more in that setting. But he worked with the Wrecking Crew members on those sessions. So it's not as though Brian wasn't doing anything. But I really do just think, and Marilyn Wilson spoke to me about this a year ago when we talked about the Wild Honey album and the Friends album, that even though Brian was much more heavily involved in those recordings on those albums and produced those albums, he was very aware of letting the other guys kind of come in and participate more and get more involved, whether it be musically or songwriting ideas, what have you. But it became more of a democratic process by 2020, and that had to do, in part, with Brian just kind of getting a little fried. We'll use that term.
Okay.
When you just get to the point where you just need a break.
All right, moving on. Track 3 on side 1 of the Beach Boys' 2020 album of 1969. It's another cover. This is like the old days with all these cover songs, but it's a great one, a dynamic recording of Bluebirds Over the Mountain.
Yeah, this song actually started in '67 as a Bruce Johnston solo recording because it wasn't something he was developing for a Beach Boys album. But then when they got to the point of the fall of '68 where, songs from each member was kind of needed, he brought this one in, and they worked on it. And he worked pretty closely with Mike on it. Mike went in and made some lyrical changes and contributions. And if you go out and listen to the original, just go to YouTube and type in Ursel Hickey, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, and you can hear it. It's a very old, kind of a rockabilly standard. Really, really country, very interesting song. The adaptations of these songs that they put into the Beach Boys vernacular really worked well. And this song in particular, I think Ed Carter, his lead guitar in this is nuts.
It's phenomenal.
He was hired in the fall of '67 as a touring band member. Ed Carter and Mike Kowalski came in the summer of '68. So by this time, by these sessions, Daryl Dragon is a part of a lot of this recording process as well.
We'll be back with more from our guest today, David Beard, as we discuss the Beach Boys' 20th album, 2020, right after this charming retromercial.
John Surtees.
WFDU FM.
We're back talking with David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, about the Beach Boys' 2020 album of 1969, and we're up to track 4. It's the first Dennis Wilson composition on the album. He came on strong on the last record, Friends. Here he is with even more songs, and they're all different. They're all great. This one taking a bit of its cue from the production style on Pet Sounds, but just a tremendous recording, Be With Me.
Yeah, it's kind of two songs in one. It's soft, but then it has that kind of arcing...
Yeah.
I don't know, what would you call it? where after he says, "Be with me, a part of me," and then the music climbs.
It's almost like it turns into like the Righteous Brothers, or like he's Bobby Hatfield or something.
It's really different. And that speaks to Dennis as a songwriter. No one is like Dennis Wilson musically. No one. And I say the same is true about Brian, in terms of his innovative ways of recording and arrangements and compositions. No one comes up with what Brian Wilson does. But Dennis worked from emotion. He just put himself right there. Now, Steve Kalinich was, I think, instrumental in bringing out the soft side of Dennis. But then as you go on a couple of years, you also have Dennis writing with Daryl Dragon songs like Make It Good and Cuddle Up.
Right? Yes, of course.
And then there's the songs Forever. And then, of course, the song that finally came out in 2013 on the Made in California box set, which is Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again, which is, this is a strange term to put together and marry, but it's emotionally mind-boggling. And so is Be With Me.
Just an incredible production. And the next song on the album is also a Dennis Wilson song, and it's a lot more raucous. It's All I Want to Do. Yeah,
and both have the same thing in common. 100% Dennis Wilson emotion.
Right. Yeah, no holding back.
No, it's just exactly, this is my expression, this is what we were recording. And this one is really unique. If you read or have read Mike Love's Good Vibrations, My Life as a Beach Boy, or listen to his audiobook, Mike talks very specifically about this recording session in detail, and talks about how Steve Desper helped Dennis set up a couple of risers so that Dennis could bring a gal in to record the ending of the song over and over and over with his carnal flourishes.
For the listeners that are confused, if you listen closely, you will hear something truly remarkable.
Mattress springs.
Right.
And a girl.
Yeah.
And I think Dennis's grunts, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting because Mike sings a lot of this song. Mike's not really on the album as a lead singer that much, except, he starts off the album with Do It Again, but that was already recorded. And I just think this is one of those ways, this is just my opinion, that they, wanted to have Mike a little bit more featured, so they got him on the recording.
Yeah, we'll censor this last part. You'll just have to buy the album, folks. And to wrap up side 1 of 2020, a beautiful instrumental written by Bruce Johnston, and it's just incredible. The Nearest Faraway Place, used as the title later on for Timothy White's History of the Beach Boys. And I just love this cut. It reminds me a lot of Brian's instrumentals on Pet Sounds, and there's a great cinematic scope to this recording.
Yeah, from a visual standpoint, by title, to your Pet Sounds point, yes, it does feel like Let's Go Away for a While.
Yeah, sequel.
Yeah. Bruce, to this day, thinks that it doesn't fit on the album. I'm glad it made it in spite of that belief. He's called it Muzak.
I love it, though. The next time you see Bruce, tell him he's wrong. It does belong on this album.
Well, this goes back. The first time I actually hung out with him backstage, and this is in 1994, I think, I was telling him, I love that. I love The Nearest Faraway Place. I was telling him all those years ago. And there was a grand piano in the room. And he said, I got booed off stage for that in Germany. And somebody else in the room heard that. It might have been Carl. And he said, What song was that? And he goes, this. And he walks over and he sits at the piano. And he starts playing it. And I was like, I'm in heaven.
Yeah, of course.
I'm in heaven. Now, he actually ended up on stage late that night. For me. Well, there was a few other people there, so he started taking requests, and
right.
Bruce, there is a show to do. It's not a private one back here.
Right.
You do have to go out and perform for the masses. He was having such a good. It was fun. I think he even dabbled with Disney Girls and Tears in the Morning. It was fun. It was fun. But it was interesting to me that was the first thing he told me when I told him how much I liked the song was, I got booed off stage for that in Germany. And I don't know what year he meant. I'm assuming like the late 60s or something like that, or early 70s, around the time of the release, and that he would have played it. But I can't imagine they would have booed him, but hey, who knows,
All right, and now we flip the record over and start side 2. It's another cover, It's Huddie Ledbetter's Cotton Fields. This is one of two versions of this song. The original version, produced by Brian Wilson. This was done at the instigation of Al, who's always been the folky of the group, who prompted Brian to put together Sloop John B. This production, which is fine, was not up to Al's vision of what the song was supposed to be. So he later produced it himself, recut it, and released it as a single. So we have two versions of Cotton Fields.
Yeah, I'm torn with this song. There's if you're listening for kind of where Brian's production is playing a role, this is the song
right
where you really got to listen. But because the other version exists, and I kind of like that steel guitar beginning.
Oh, I love it.
It's a little different. It's a little bit more Al. It's just a little bit more Al.
Yeah.
Which is why I think I connect a little bit more with it. Whereas if 2020 had been produced by Brian, the entire album, and he'd been involved vocally and just immersed in it like he was with Friends and Wild Honey and Smiley, I think we'd just have a fully different listening experience. If Brian was producing Dennis, if Brian was, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Similarly with this song of Cotton Fields, this version. But what's good to be said about the other version is what Al did obviously worked because it charted in the UK in 1970 and it went to number 3.
Yeah, huge hit over there.
So, yeah, big-time hit. That version, Al's version, was a big-time hit. I don't know if the album version from 2020 would have been a hit. We don't know because it wasn't released as such. We can't really make an argument one way or the other. But I do like, again, if you're listening to this album, I like that we have both versions because we get to hear Brian's production. And there's not a lot of that on this collection, so I do like it for that reason.
Well, you know what? Let's play both. We'll start with the album version and then segue into the single version. And next up, two waltzes, courtesy of Brian. I Went to Sleep and Time to Get Alone. Let's talk about the first one, I Went to Sleep.
This is, I was talking a little bit ago about what Dennis brought to recordings and what Brian brought to recordings. And this is one of those great prime examples of the iconoclastic and simplistic way that Brian, and I say simplistic because the songs are about simplistic things. I Went to Sleep. It's a simplistic topic. But the song is just beautiful. It's an atmospheric / environmental song where he is able to take a topic, which is a relatively life, what's going on around me in life topic, and just making it really connectable. I don't know if that's a word. That you can connect with it so easily, and gosh, it's so wistful. It's so relaxing. It's so Brian.
Yeah, and as good as that one is, I think the next one's better. Time to Get Alone. I think this is a classic with lyrics about going out in the snow and being in a toboggan. So it has kind of a winter / Christmas feel, and I'm surprised it hasn't become a winter standard because it's that good. This is a song that was intended for another group. We were talking earlier about Brian doing these outside projects. And this one was intended for a group called Redwood, which was fronted by Danny Hutton, or he was a member of the group, and eventually that group later morphed into Three Dog Night.
Yeah, I think I'm getting this right. I think it was a book by Chuck Negron. Somebody was relating to me that, I don't know if it was you, somebody was telling me about the book that came out, and that there's a point in the book where he's recounting this story, and I don't know if it was for Darlin' or Time to Get Alone, because those are the two songs that Brian worked with Redwood on.
Right.
That Al and Mike kind of had Brian, I don't know if cornered is the right word, because I haven't read the book. I don't know I'm trying to remember the best I can. And they were saying to him, if we're going to record this song, you're going to record it with the Beach Boys. So I don't know if it was this one or Darlin' or both.
Yeah, and I've also heard it was Carl, Dennis, and Mike. I've...
Oh, yeah, so there you go. Right. So basically, it was the Beach Boys saying, this is a really good song. You got to record it with us. What are you doing? I mean, and again, this speaks earlier, was we were talking about how Brian Massoon working in December of '68 with the Honeys. And if you look at Brian's career as a producer, going back to the early '60s when the Beach Boys first started out, he was working with worked with Paul Peterson. He worked with Jan and Dean. He worked with the Honeys then. He worked with Sharon Marie. Brian really, truly, my opinion, enjoyed his role the most as a producer.
Yeah.
And through that, the songwriting and the development of harmonies, I think he probably had the time of his life having the Beach Boys at his disposal for those harmonies when they started out, the same way that he was having the time of his life with the Wrecking Crew in the studio, because he had what he needed to execute what he was hearing in his head and getting it out there, and thank God. So it's just what Brian had always done. You know, he wanted to keep producing with people that he was interested in musically and wanted to do productions with other musical entities. So it's not new in that regard at all. Brian was always doing that when he was allowed. Remember, Murray kind of reeled him in and said, you can't write number one hits for Jan and Dean.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
they ended up having the first hit with Surf City, which Brian gave to them.
Yeah, I can see the guys going, oh my God, it's Surf City all over again.
Well, yeah, they can't, and here at this point in the Beach Boys' career, with the exception to Do It Again, in the U.S. anyways. Now, again, they were having success in the U.K. Their songs weren't climbing the charts. The Friends album hit, 126?
Yeah.
You know, that's as high as it went as an album. So it didn't even break 100. This one ended up, let me check here, 68. The album went to 68 in the U.S. and the album reached number 3 in the U.K. So this is a difference. You know, the UK fans are eating this stuff up. Here in the U.S., it's not Smile. And Time to Get Alone, you know how some songs are in a catalog by a group and they're just like, they're good songs, they're really good songs, but they're not that. They don't make these greatest hits collections, so people don't really pay attention to them. This is one of those songs that you should really pay attention to.
I think Carl's lead vocal on this is as good, as sweet as his lead on God Only Knows.
Oh, it's way up there. It's there's something really. Everybody on the song sounds wonderful.
So after that blissful number comes the controversial moment on this album, and for some, this record is tainted by the association with Charlie Manson, because the next song, Never Learn Not to Love, is a collaboration between Dennis Wilson and Charlie Manson.
So I was just yesterday reading, I think it's Peter M. Carlin's Catch a Wave, The Rise, Fall, and Redemption of Beach Boys' Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
And I was reading a passage, and apparently I think I read this correctly. I think that's where I read it. I'm pretty sure that's where I read it. Because I was always wondering about why Charles Manson wasn't credited as a songwriter. Well, and I knew the Beach Boys' history enough that I knew I had learned there was other situations where somebody might have helped on a song and they didn't get credit. In fact, if you ask Steve Kalinich, he helped co-write All I Want to Do. That's one of those cases. So with Never Learn Not to Love, what happened was they went to Charles, or Dennis went to Charles or whatever, and said, do you want a co-writing credit or do you want me to buy you out? Do you want me to pay you for your contribution? And he took the money. Because this is before, they all knew he's kind of strange, but this is before the horrific things that happened in 1969.
Oh, of course, yeah. This was when Charlie Manson was just thought of as, another freaky long-haired singer-songwriter that was buddies with Dennis, because they were both into having lots of girls around. Let's be honest, that's what that's all about. And, of course, Dennis tried to help him and get his music out there, get him a recording contract with Brother Records, but Charlie was just so evil that it wasn't going to work. But he sort of turned, I think, Dennis turned what was kind of a dark, ominous song into something a little more positive.
And I don't recall the source. I wish I remembered the source. But it's believed, I heard one story says that that Charlie Manson wrote this song because the Beach Boys weren't getting along great as a group, and when you listen to lyrics, it speaks to this, that it was kind of a song to get them together. And Never Learn Not to Love, Cease to Resist, Come and Say You Love Me, Give Up Your World If You Want to Be With Me, I'm Your Kind, I'm Your Kind. So the lyrics kind of do tell that story. Like, let's be, kind of going back to let's be friends, right? Like,
right.
let's put the good foot forward. So I don't know how accurate that is, but it's certainly an interesting take, and it's a more positive way to look at the recording. And it is produced well, and it's executed well.
And there's no better production and execution in the next two songs that wrap up this album. Leftovers from the Smile period find their way onto 2020 and 1969, Our Prayer, and Cabanescence. Once again, the Beach Boys mining the, at that time, unreleased Smile material.
Yeah, I think anyone was happy when Smile material came out. You know, if I asked the guys why were these songs put on, I don't know if anybody could tell me. If you look at the catalog, the fact that Smile was shelved and Smile had the big build-up that it had, I've always kind of understood it to be a situation where they were always trying to get the Smile material out because so much had been built up about it. So they were always kind of trying to find what Brian had worked on and finished, or was so close to having been finished that they could put it out. And they did Carl did some tweaking, some additional overdubbing.
Right.
But they closed off the album nicely. I mean, yeah, if you don't know the origins of this stuff and you're just listening to it, it's kind of a really nice listening experience.
So this is a really solid set of songs, and like I said, it's my number 2 favorite Beach Boys album, but again, not a big hit, at least here in the U.S., and I don't know if it's got something to do with the packaging. We always like to talk about the covers on these discussions, but, you know, you have kind of a nondescript photo of the Beach Boys, and that's kind of it.
You know, Brian's not on the cover. There are no songs listed on the back. So that's even more perplexing.
Right.
There's nothing on the back except another picture of the guys, and they're blurry. They're moving from the pose picture from the front. And you have to open it up, and there's Brian, the top of Brian's head, kind of a Where's Waldo, popping his head up from behind an eye chart. And the songs are listed in small type under the letters from the eye chart. You know, it's 20/20 vision. That's why they do the eye chart.
Right, and why they're blurry on the back and all that.
It's weird. It's just... And so I think that was one of the nice things for me, from, again, not understanding the packaging in this particular case when I listened to it on the Warner Brothers release, because it wasn't about the packaging. It was just about the listening experience.
So we just spent the past hour going track by track on the 2020 album. David Beard, what is happening in the latest issue of Endless Summer Quarterly?
Yeah, 2020.
Hey!
I've interviewed Mike Love, Al Jardine, and Bruce Johnston. I've interviewed Ginger Blake of the Honeys about Brian working with them. A little bit of a tribute for the late Guy Webster. Guy was a pretty famous photographer. There's a lot kind of, you know, and when I say there's a lot going on, there's a lot that's happened is a better way to put it, in the Beach Boys umbrella. And those two things are that Daryl Dragon, who went on to be captain of Captain and Tennille, passed away on January 2nd of this year. And Hal Blaine just died at the age of 90.
Right.
Beach Boy fans will know that Hal was responsible for playing on so many hit records for the group, chief among them Good Vibrations, most of the Pet Sounds album. So I'm going to do something to Daryl Dragon and Hal Blaine in the summer edition, and it gives me time to pull things together correctly for Hal.
So where would people go, David?
ESQuarterly.com. So it's ESQ, short for Endless Summer Quarterly. ESQuarterly.com.
And you can follow the Endless Summer Quarterly page on Facebook as well. And before we go, David, we should mention again that I Can Hear Music digital-only release featuring sessions and demos and things from the 2020 era. And I think we should close with a cut from it. We opened with a cut from it. What would you pick, and your thoughts on the collection?
One, I mean, you get to hear kind of Do It Again in its process.
Right.
Which is interesting. There's some demos. There's obscure things. But the nicest thing about this whole collection for me is the last track, which is It True What They Say About Dixie, which is this an outtake where tape's rolling, and it's Audrey Wilson singing.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's really cool that we get to hear the mom.
Yeah, there's also a great live set, too, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but we've run out of time. We'll end with that song. And, David, thanks so much for being on the show.
Do you remember the old song, Is It True What They Say About Dixie?